So I just got done seeing Captain America Brave New World in theaters. This is going to be my non-spoiler review for the film. As we always do, I'm going to go through the positives, then the negatives, and then we'll give the movie a rating out of 10. So let's get right into this. So starting off with the positives, I did like the overarching plot of the movie quite a bit. Now there are some issues with the execution of this, which we'll talk about in the negatives, but overall I was very invested in the story, which was mostly a political thriller. There was a lot of like foreign politics going on, where there was that celestial in the Indian Ocean and different countries are trying to get their share of the adamantium from it, which I did like that they brought that element back from Eternals. That was something that we saw years ago. We never knew it was going to come back in the MCU or not, and it finally did in this movie. And I like that being the backdrop of the story. And there's a lot of mysteries going on with it, especially when it comes to United States' involvement in trying to get their share of the adamantium. And this movie is quite packed when it comes to the villains. There's three main villains in the film. You have the leader, who's known as Samuel Stearns, Sidewinder, played by Giancarlo Esposito, and then of course Red Hulk, which, I mean, we all know who that is. It's Thaddeus Ross, President Ross, played by the wonderful Harrison Ford, and he was incredible in this. I've always been a big fan of Harrison Ford ever since I was a kid, ever since I saw him in, Star Wars, Indiana Jones, and he killed it in this movie. He did a great job. There is so much nuance to his performance, so much subtlety in how he acts, and when he actually does become the Red Hulk, it is really, really insane. The CGI has its meh moments, but honestly most of it was pretty good. I know there's gonna be a lot of people that are gonna be saying it looks terrible no matter what, but I don't think it looked bad at all. I think it looked pretty solid watching it in IMAX. It was quite a good moment, and it's just nice to see a Hulk again in some form, because the last time we really saw like an actual Hulk was honestly Infinity War. After that, Hulk kind of just went in his own little thing where he became Professor Hulk, and that's fine for Bruce Banner and all, but it's just nice to see like an actual full-on Hulk again. I guess we have She-Hulk as well, but again, she's not really like a out-of-control monster like Red Hulk is here. And even though he's not in a lot of the movie, for the parts he is in, it was pretty great. But honestly, in terms of villains, the leader might be the standout in my opinion. I wasn't expecting him to be a major villain in this movie, but he actually plays a pretty huge role in the plot. I would say he plays the biggest role in the plot out of almost any character, and he was incredible. It's just another aspect of the Incredible Hulk that was returning into this movie, which in general, I will say, and a lot of people have been saying this, the movie does feel like a sequel to the Incredible Hulk, which might seem like a weird thing to do for Captain America 4, but I will say the movie does do an equal amount of things that feel like a sequel to The Incredible Hulk, as it also is a sequel to The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and even in some cases, a sequel to Captain America Civil War. It's a sequel to like 3 different projects that might sound like too much, but I think it actually works. I think they take enough from those movies and implement it in a way that is totally fine, because The Incredible Hulk always felt like this movie that was just such a forgotten movie in the MCU, like the forgotten child. No one ever talks about it. It feels so apart from the MCU. A lot of people genuinely don't even think it's part of the MCU. I've heard people say that before. They genuinely don't think it is, because it feels so separate. Obviously, a big part of that is the fact that the person who plays Bruce Banner in that movie, Edward Norton, does not play Bruce Banner anymore. We have Mark Ruffalo. So obviously it does feel very separate because of that. But getting to see the leader return, getting to see Thaddeus Ross, I mean, of course, he was in prior movies as well, but seeing him in here as a really big part of the movie, it all comes together, and I thought it was actually quite good. But when it comes to the elements that are a sequel to Captain America Civil War, as well as Captain America, or I guess the Falcon and Winter Soldier, is mainly in terms of Isaiah Bradley. Now, Isaiah Bradley has a storyline here that I thought was really, really good and really interesting. He's unfortunately not as big of a part of the movie that I was hoping he would be. I honestly thought he was going to have a bigger role to play, but his role is basically being the catalyst to start this whole movie. Obviously, not himself, he's not in control, but because he was one of the people who were experimented on as a super soldier, him being controlled by others, it makes sense why they would have that play out in that way. And I'm trying not to say anything with that, I'm trying not to spoil things specifically, which is why I'm being very vague with my wording, but I think it makes sense to have him in that role. And obviously it following up what we learned about him in The Falcon and Winter Soldier, I thought was really great for his character and really great for the story itself. And then that's kind of how it feels like a sequel to Captain America Civil War, is because obviously that element of like the super soldiers and whether or not they should get in trouble for things, even when they're not in control. Like, that element of the movie is there. And of course, the main lead of the film, Sam Wilson as Captain America, and of course played by Anthony Mackie, who I think did a pretty solid job leading this film. I don't think he's like one of the better actors in the MCU. I don't think he really has enough to work with, to be honest. I'm not saying, you know, the movie's bad. I'm just saying there isn't really enough like emotional moments or enough really deep moments that allows him to shine the same way Chris Evans as Steve Rogers was able to. There was a lot more to his movies that I feel like just were allowed him to work with it more, and I hope they give him more stuff in the future that allows him to do a lot more. But I just don't think there was enough here to really get to see, you know, Anthony Mackie's acting skills on full display. But for what was there, he was solid. I think he definitely fits the role well. One thing I was really worried about with Sam Wilson taking the mantle of Captain America is the fact that he is not a super soldier, right? I was always thinking that. I was always like, you know, I'm totally fine with him becoming Captain America, but he doesn't have the super serum, right? So he's immediately going to feel inferior to Steve Rogers because of that. And I don't know how he's going to be able to, you know, take on the same types of enemies that Steve Rogers was able to take on. But I feel like the movie does a good job handling that because, first of all, he gets a really badass upgrade to his suit. He's got all this vibranium armor that is like really, really powerful and really, really protects him. And just in general, like, I mean, of course he can fly. He was always able to fly, even as, you know, when he was Falcon, but that obviously helps him a lot. He has a lot of gadgets. Like, he almost kind of feels like Iron Man in a sense with how much he's relying on the technology of his suit. But I'm totally fine with that because he still is a great fighter. He's very agile. He's very athletic. So I do think he was able to take up the mantle properly in this movie. They were able to show that enough, and it actually works and makes sense. I'm just glad they do that. And there is some other scenes that also help relieve that concern I had. And so I think pretty much every concern I had about that has kind of been lifted at this point, and I'm totally on board with him as Captain America. We also have Joaquin Torres as Falcon here. Of course, he was in the Falcon and Winter Soldier series, and he didn't have like a huge role to play in that show, but this movie he does have a pretty big role to play as the new Falcon, and he was great. He kind of played almost a comic relief character. I mean, a lot of times movies do that with the sidekicks. They always have them be kind of like a comic relief in a lot of ways, and the comedy was good. You know, MCU has had some problems with comedy in the past. I don't think this movie has that problem. I think they handle the comedy rather well. It's not, you know, in your face every 5 seconds, but when it is there, it's funny, gets the crowd to laugh a little bit, and it lightens the mood in some scenes that I think is totally fine. But in general, I think he is doing a great job in the role. There's a lot of good action scenes with him, so I'm definitely excited to see more of him as the Falcon. And lastly, in general, I did like the feel and the tone of this movie. I think it was really, really well handled, and it was just a very nice change of pace for the MCU. I feel like the MCU's been so focused on multiversal threats and all these other things that I'm glad this movie was able to just remain a grounded story. Yes, even having Red Hulk in it, it still was a grounded story for the most part, and it felt more like that Winter Soldier type feel that I was kind of missing from the MCU. I think it's good to have that alongside the more multiversal, crazy, you know, otherworldly stuff. So I definitely appreciated this movie for the most part. The action was honestly pretty good as well, most of it at least. But that's going to bring us to the negatives though, because some of the action was also pretty bad. It was a weird mix of it. Like, there were some action scenes that were incredible, and then others that were so chopped up and so edited to the point where it was just not pleasant to look at. Didn't really give you any like satisfying moments, but other scenes were great. So it really just depends on the scene. Like, I can literally tell you one action scene that I thought was one of the best in the MCU, and another one that I thought was one of the worst. So it's crazy, the inconsistency there. I don't really know how that happened, but regardless, it happened. And I think one of the biggest negatives with this movie is the fact that you can tell it was reshot to hell. You can tell this movie was ripped apart and put back together and just gone through development hell. You can tell. And we know because we've heard a lot of it. I mean, we've been hearing of reshoots for months now, and reshoots are common with movies. It's not like a uncommon thing, but you can tell they were pretty significant here because there are some scenes that, first of all, the structure is very messy in the movie. The pacing is very off as well. I like the story and the overall, like the story itself, the narrative, but when it comes to the structure of that narrative and the execution, it does kind of have a lot of messy moments to it. But I think one of the most, you know, telling moments of it being reshot is the fact that there are some scenes where you can either see someone's lips moving in the corner and then they're saying something different, and you could tell they probably, you know, changed that scene in post to put that dialogue in, but that's not what the character was originally saying. Only a couple moments like that. And then one of the worst moments involving this, where you could tell it was reshot, there's a really important speech that Sam Wilson gives in this movie. Really important moment. And it's got some of the worst green screen I think I've ever seen in a movie. Like, it's really bad. It's like they literally plopped this man in there. They put him behind a green screen and plopped him into the scene to have him give this speech. You can tell he was not there giving that speech. So stuff like that just kind of like irks me. It's like so many of these like high budget blockbusters always have this problem, and you could tell the reason the budget's high is probably because of those reshoots. But it's like, why couldn't you just have a vision from the start and deliver that vision? Why do things always have to get changed? Why do things always have to get moved around? That is what I don't ever understand. And I think it just creates a movie that feels like it doesn't really know the direction it wants to go in at certain points. The overarching story, everything like that, I did like, and I think it's still good, but you could tell there was a lot of messy moments there, and I think it would have all came together better in the end if they just had a better and more clear vision in line with what they wanted this movie to be. I also think there was some really bad dialogue when it comes to like exposition heavy dialogue. I've never been a fan of this type of dialogue. It's not every scene, it's only some scenes, especially in the beginning of the movie, but there's a lot of moments where it's like, okay, we need to make sure this character says this very specific thing so the audience will understand what we're trying to say, but it always comes across as so inorganic. Like, you don't have to tell us these things like word for word for word. A lot of exposition heavy dialogue, and it's in ways that I just didn't think worked that well. And I think by far my least favorite thing about this movie is actually the post-credit scene. It's not like the end of the world because it's just a post-credit scene. It didn't even have to be in the movie. I know post-credit scenes are like a ritual for Marvel movies at this point, like they just have to happen. But this one was just so bad. I think it might be one of the worst post-credit scenes in an MCU movie. And the reason I hated it so much is because it was pointless. Like, I kid you not, you don't have any reason to wait for this post-credit scene. Like, sure, they've done post-credit scenes before that were just for laughs, and like those were kind of pointless too, but at least those ones were for laughs. So you can say the point of it was to make the audience laugh, right? Like a good example is the Doctor Strange 2 post-credit scene where Bruce Campbell stops punching himself. Like, that's like just one that's kind of like, oh, it's just a cheeky little thing. This scene isn't like that though. This scene isn't one to make you laugh. This scene is meant to be taken seriously, but it doesn't give us a single new piece of information. All it does is tell us stuff we already knew and tease things in the most inorganic way possible. I don't want to say anything else because maybe you want it to be surprised, but I just need to make it very clear that there is nothing exciting about this post-credit scene. There's nothing exciting. Like, sure, it was like, okay, you know, it's good to know the direction of where the MCU is headed, but fuck, I already knew, man. We knew this stuff. Why are you telling me stuff we already knew? Like, it's literally just, you have to see that, you have to just watch it to know what I'm talking about, but it's literally just like someone speaking to the audience, like, get excited for next product. But it's like, we know what's coming though. We already know the pipeline, and you're not teasing anything and you know, specifically, you're just being very vague about stuff that we know is coming. I don't want to say anything else, but that's basically the gist of it. You'll know what I mean when you watch it. Overall, I'm gonna give this movie a solid 7.5 out of 10. I think it's a good movie. I think it deserves the title of a good movie. But I mean, obviously I wanted a lot more out of it. I thought it could have been a lot better. I mean, I think it's definitely the worst Captain America movie, but there's a pretty high bar there though. I think the Captain America trilogy was incredible, especially the Winter Soldier and Civil War. So very hard to live up to those. But I think this movie is totally good. And honestly, I think the reviews, I read through some of them, it really just depends. There were some people who just, in general, they just don't like Marvel movies to begin with. And if you don't like Marvel movies to begin with, if you think most of them aren't that great, you're probably not going to like this one as well. So I wouldn't go into this expecting to like it if you don't like most MCU movies. If you like most MCU movies, you'll probably like this one. I think that's pretty much the best way to put it. And it's kind of what I got from reading some of the reviews online. It seems like most people who didn't like it either just don't like Marvel movies in general, or they wanted something out of it that they just didn't get, which is fine. It's, you know, it's all up to opinion at the end of the day. I kind of felt like the movie met my expectations though. Like, I wasn't expecting it to be one of the better MCU movies, but it also was perfectly fine. Like, it was a good movie. I enjoyed it. That's about it. There's nothing else to say. I'm not even gonna go into spoilers. Don't really have a reason to, because there really isn't any spoiler heavy things to talk about that I'm at least interested in talking about. But yeah, it's good. I think don't let the low Rotten Tomato scores get to you. Believe me, I think a lot of the reviews, it's their opinion, but I think you'll probably end up liking it. Trust me. It's messy, but it's good, in my opinion. So hopefully you guys enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. I will see you all in my next one. Peace out.